Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to RMIT and welcome to this overview of programs in computer science and information technology. My name is James Harland. I'm one of the academic staff in the School of Computing Technologies, and it's my pleasure to talk to you today about the particular programs we offer. So I'm certainly very happy to talk about things, but even more happy to answer your particular questions. So please do feel free to put questions in the chat at any particular time, and we'll get to them either during the presentation or afterwards when we have a Q&A session. Next slide, please. Now, first things first, everyone, one of the things we're very strong on at RMIT is a reconciliation agenda, and the beginning of every meeting like this starts with an acknowledgement of country. So RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders, past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous people here present today. RMIT also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. Now that kind of acknowledgement of country is something that we take very seriously. Then there's a number of my academic staff colleagues who spend a good deal of time expanding on that, possibly getting students to write their own acknowledgements or finding other ways to make it a real experience rather than just a ritual acknowledgement at the start of formal meetings, etc. Next slide, please. And as part of that general commitment to reconciliation, one of the things that's often great to start with is getting some of the landmarks or ideas or connections you can make around RMIT to Indigenous reconciliation. So not only is the university committed to supporting it, you can see some artwork like this one, which is one that many students will pass on their daily life when we get back on campus, or until we do, we can often obviously do so virtually as well. But part of that isn't just acknowledgements at the start of meetings, it's also with the principles of Bunjil, where we change our ways of knowing, working and being to support sustainable reconciliation and activate a relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous staff, students and community. That's a great part that makes me very proud to be part of RMIT, that we have such an active agenda as part of what we do in general, let alone with our particular computing degrees. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things about RMIT is that it's a very big place, and it's often easy to overlook how big. RMIT has a long history, at least for Australian institutions, being founded in 1887 as the Working Man's College, has grown since to be Australia's largest tertiary institution with something like 90,000 students, I think was the most recent figure. I guess part of that is that RMIT is a very big place. We have 5 campuses, 3 of them here in Australia and 2 in Vietnam, and programs taught amongst a number of different other countries. Other connections we have worldwide with about 500,000 alumni and 200 university partners. That means it's a big place. Now, with size comes diversity, and with diversity comes opportunity to find a niche that's going to suit you. So being big isn't everything, but the size and diversity of RMIT means that everybody should be able to find a place, a tribe, a niche, a home, somewhere that works for you. So that size shouldn't be something we shy away from. It's something to say we celebrate the diversity we have simply because of the large numbers involved. Next slide, please. Now, part of that here in Melbourne, what does it look like from a Melbourne perspective? We have a campus in the city, it's right in the heart of the CBD. We have another campus at Bundoora and another one at Brunswick. So we are geographically distributed, although from a computing point of view, most of our activities in Australia are concentrated at the city and the CBD campus. We do, though, have 2 campuses in Vietnam, one in Hanoi and one in Ho Chi Minh City. And the Ho Chi Minh City one is particularly relevant to computing degrees because it's possible to do some of your studies there. So of those 5 campuses, the 2 most relevant to computing are the one in the city and one in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. Having said that, of course, at the moment, we don't have classes on campus and we do a number of things online. But when we do get back on campus, hopefully that will be somewhere we can look forward to showing you around. Next slide, please. So why study information technology and why study at RMIT? Well, both of those are great questions. I think studying information technology, computing or something in that area is a very popular thing and there's quite a lot of demand. And there's lots of underlying good reasons why you want to do that. I remember hearing it said that if you want to heal someone, become a doctor, but if you want to change the world, become a computing person. And that's being increasingly true in a number of areas, particularly with the rise of data and artificial intelligence and other kinds of areas like that. I know one academic I know very well said recently that data is the new oil and AI is the engine of innovation. And I think it's very much a case that if you want to be innovative, you want to do any kind of creative practice in lots of different areas, a thorough knowledge of IT is important. Now, why is RMIT appropriate? Well, I think there's a great question that starts that off is on the very next slide. Next slide, please. About why is studying IT at RMIT like the Rolling Stones? Okay, you might recognise this particular photo, and the person on the left, Charlie Watts, you might have noticed had RIP Charlie, unfortunately died during the week in the age of 80 or so. But nonetheless, does anyone have any idea why I would commence a presentation on computing and information technology at RMIT with the Rolling Stones? Any ideas? Might seem a bit weird, might seem a bit strange. As I said, more topical than I could have anticipated when we were planning this particular talk. But why on earth would a British rock band like this be something we'd associate with computing at RMIT? Well, I guess I won't leave you in suspense for too long, but obviously the Rolling Stones are famous, they're successful, they're rich, they're British, but nobody's perfect. Sorry to any British people in the audience, but I guess the key point is that, next slide please, that they've been doing what they did since the 1960s. And as you can see from that first photo compared to this one, what they've had to do over those 50 or 60 years is adapt and change. Whilst they still might be recognised to be the same group, obviously the circumstances in the 1960s were very different from what they're doing last week. And I think that's an important part of computing, and that's what makes computing both exciting and challenging, is that things do move along and change. If you had a look at RMIT's first computer, which I think arrived in 1962, it would have been a box full of all final components with people in white coats and entry restrictions at the door because the computer had to be air conditioned and was often the only air conditioned building room in the building and things like that. Now there's probably more power in your phone than a lot of the computing we had in the world in the 1960s. So we've had to adapt, improve and change over that time. And that's certainly something that is very much the mantra of RMIT, is keeping up with the skills that are necessary to make you relevant today, whilst also giving the conceptual understanding so that when the next trends come along in 5 or 10 or 15 years time, then we get very much graduate to at that wave rather than being swept away by it. Now, I guess there's 3 pillars about how we do that. One is remaining connected to industry. One of the very things we do very strongly is have a lot of industry connection, both in the design of our courses and in their practice. So that can be collaboration with tech companies, but also having reviews regularly of our curriculum with industry experts to make sure that what we're doing will suit the market. Not only is it that we think we're good, but there's a lot of accreditation and other bodies who say, actually, you're pretty good as well, including being in the top 10 universities in computer science and information systems, according to some global rankings like the QS World University ranking. So that's recognition of the coming to study computing at RMIT, you're doing so at a top place. I guess the third pillar is having choice for students. We have a number of courses that are compulsory, but there's also a number of courses where students can choose a specialisation and to reflect not just the current IT trend, but also their passion. So you might be very passionate about AI. Well, we can choose courses that will give you a greater understanding of that particular area. You might be really interested in cybersecurity. We can focus you in that particular area. So it isn't just one size fits all. There's some flexibility in this. I note there's a question that's been raised about the fundamental difference between computer science and information technology. We'll get to that fairly soon. That's a really important question. And in particular, what's the fundamental difference between the degrees we offer? So we will get to that very soon. Next slide, please. So in order to understand the sort of landscape that we're talking about, let me just walk you through the 4 main degrees we have, which are Bachelor of Computer Science, Software Engineering, Information Technology and Data Science. And I also want to mention the associate degree of Information Technology, which is a pathway into some of our other programs. So understanding the difference between those 4 is exactly what we're going to be talking about next. Next slide, please. Now, Roughly speaking, this is what I call the most important slide in the presentation. This gives us often an overview of the differences between the degrees and the entry requirements. So as you can see, most of our programs are 3 years long, with the exception of software engineering. I'll explain that a little more in a minute. And you can see the indicative ATARs there as well, about 75.15 for computer science and etc. Now, a word about ATARs, they're always somewhat vague, and they're always somewhat changeable. That's because the way we come to an ATAR figure like the ones published here, this is the lowest first round offer we made in 2021. Now that doesn't mean that's exactly the same as the same offers that we made next year or in subsequent years, but it does give you a rough indication of where the demand was this year. The other thing to keep in mind is that ATARs are not a strict cutoff. There's always some people who get in with an ATAR slightly below the published ones. That's for various reasons, including the fact that not everyone takes up their first round offer. So if you came in with an ATAR of 74.9 for argument's sake, then it would still be reasonable, not necessarily guaranteed, but still reasonable that you may well get into, say, computer science. So always take ATARs that are a little bit vague with a grain of salt. They do vary, and they're not necessarily strict cutoffs, but it gives you a ballpark figure of what the sort of likelihood is to be next year. Now, particularly with data science, that was something we introduced only this year, so we've only got 1 year's worth of data for that. We guaranteed any entry above 70. I don't know if that will necessarily maintain next year, but it's certainly a new program compared to the others. It's not quite the same history. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the requirements. Please note, for computer science and software engineering, there's a requirement to have 25 in math methods or specialist maths, whereas for information technology and data science, you can have 20 in any maths, including further maths. So the English requirement is pretty standard across RMIT, 25 in English or 30 in EAL, but the maths does differ between computer science and software engineering. But I guess the point is, if you have further, there's a pathway for you into the degrees, even if you don't necessarily have maths or specialist maths. So that's the rough picture, but I think one of the important principles, next slide please, to keep in mind is what I call the ice cream principle. Now, what's the ice cream principle? It's simply that whatever course you look at, some people look at our courses and say, do you know what? There's a lot of similarity between these. Well, it's a bit like standing outside a gelati shop with a bunch of kids and saying, who wants an ice cream? Yes, please, Dad. So, all right, well, which one do you want? And typically there's a window. I think we might have a slider if we can bring it up. Can we move the slide forward if it's there? That's the one. You see a shop window like this, and the kids say, wow, I could have choc with choc chip, or choc with choc sauce, or mint choc, or strawberries on top, or sprinkles, or I could have a cone, or I could have a cup. I could have cherries. I could have cherries and sprinkles. And they spend about an arbitrarily long amount of time trying to choose between ice cream. And at some point, Dad, or at least this particular dad, or my kids were this age, yelling about, why on earth are you messing around choosing? It's all ice cream. So do keep in mind, between these 4 degrees, there's a lot of overlap between them, but a lot of the differences are about packaging and choice and about the particular varieties of toppings or other kinds of aspects you want. Fundamentally, they're all pretty similar, and that's the kind of particular advantage. Next slide, please. There's another advantage of a software engineering degree. I'll articulate that in a minute about what I have in computer science, but roughly speaking, it's a 1-year internship. Now, computer science, what does that involve? Well, this is probably our most technically sophisticated degree, where software developers, artificial intelligence specialists, or someone who might design the IT side of a driverless car, this might be the kind of degree for them. As we mentioned, it does require maths methods or specialist maths, and this year's ATAR was about 75. Now, this is where you develop programming skills, the ability to develop software systems, and some of our specializations include things like cloud computing, big data, mobile computing, and security. So if you want to be that technical cutting edge person who works at companies like Google, Microsoft, or perhaps have your own startup developing some new application, this is probably the degree for you. And it's very much where our most technically focused students get to express their desire, their passion, and find the ways that really works for them. So that's the key role, if you like, of that particular computer science degree. That's also where our research students generally come from. So if you're the type who's really passionate about becoming a technical guru, this is probably the program for you. Next slide, please. So here are a couple of recent graduates doing their thing. You could end up working with things like robotics. This is a particular Baxter robot we call Rosie, who lives in one of our laboratories in the school. But sort of, you can end up working in systems architecture, designing how to put together software packages, coming up with new applications, or being a security specialist, the sort of person the bank might ring to say, we think we were hacked last night, can you investigate? So if that sort of technical expertise is your thing, this is the program for you. Next slide, please. Software engineering, as someone has asked about, the main difference is that you do 1 year's worth of internship. So it's very similar to computer science degree. In fact, the first 2 years are exactly the same. In the third year, you then spend 1 year working in a 12-month internship. So you go back to industry and work as a software engineer for 12 months. Then when you return for the fourth year, you do a very project-focused set of courses which give you experience in designing, managing and producing software projects on time, within the budget and to specification. So having that sort of first 2 years in common with computer science gives you a technical base, but then you have that further 2 years of experience, one by working in industry and one by focusing on projects, to have that competence in developing technical specialist projects from inception to completion. That's a very popular program for obvious reasons, but also because that sort of experience is often where you get project leaders or people who are developing in teams of software, will often be led by a software engineer. I think it's also remarked by a lot of our academics that in the first 2 years, we often tell students about the importance of certain aspects such as writing documentable code, or understanding human requirements, or having a good style so that someone else can read what you write. And the students say, yes, we understand. They spend 12 months in industry, and when they come back in their fourth year, they say, you know, it's really important to write maintainable code so someone else can pick it up. It's really important to understand user requirements. In other words, there's nothing quite like doing it for real to bring home those lessons. So it's one thing for academics like me and others to teach people these are important. It's another one entirely for them to experience it. And that kind of relationship is something that we find quite important to get the best graduates having that sort of 12 months of experience. So that's the main advantage of the software engineering degree, is you get that 12 months of experience in industry before you graduate. And it's certainly not unknown that a lot of our software engineering students continue working for the group they've done their internship with, and that's something that is quite common. Next slide, please. So in terms of where you might end up as a software engineer, it's similar to where you might be in a computer scientist, but you're probably more dealing with managing people, such as a business analyst or a team leader, rather than the technical person who might be developing the code that runs on the robot you can see, for example. So someone like a software engineer might lead a team of people developing the robots, and the software engineer would be the project leader or something like that, possibly managing a number of computer scientists. So that's the sort of relationship between the two. Clearly, you need to have that technical understanding to be able to manage such people, but you're not necessarily a technical specialist to the same degree. Next slide, please. Now, our Bachelor of Information Technology is our most flexible and perhaps unsurprisingly, our most popular degree. It's got a similar overlap to a lot of the courses we do in computing, but doesn't require as much compulsory computing in order to allow you to combine IT with various other disciplines. So as you can see, the entry requirements don't require math methods or specialist. So if you've got further maths, then this is an appropriate thing for you to enter into. And really it's about adapting and applying IT infrastructure and technologies to a variety of problems. So it might be designing, planning, troubleshooting an IT infrastructure such as e-commerce. So someone who wants to set up a site like eBay or maintain an online business. You certainly need some technical understanding of how to set up the website, but you're also going to need some understanding of finance, of marketing, of accounting. So this particular program gives you the freedom to get the technical basis you need to do that, but also some other disciplines, business, it's a very popular one, languages, other kinds of areas where you might want to say, I want to combine this with, say, legal expertise or language understanding or things like that. So a lot of IT is, we know that IT is largely everywhere. This gives us a way of combining with a number of other disciplines to be able to have someone who's got a certain amount of technical focus as well as an ability to work in other contexts or apply other disciplinary knowledge to their IT problems. Another remarkable advantage of this program is you can actually study this program as well at RMIT Vietnam, and in particular in Ho Chi Minh City. So you could pick up and spend a semester at RMIT Vietnam studying the same program you would here in Melbourne. So it's quite an advantage if you're interested in study abroad, and I know a number of students who have done that have come back and praised that as the best thing ever. So if you're interested in that, I guess once the borders are open again soon, then that's one option that we'd strongly recommend for people who are inclined to think they might want to spend some time outside Australia. Next slide, please. And the sort of application areas are similar to what you get in computing, but perhaps a broader range. You might end up testing software. You might end up being a web developer, developing things for applications for websites and other kinds of interactive displays. You might end up in IT support or doing quality assurance, or perhaps administering a large database for a data science company. So there's a very broad variety of jobs matching the disciplinary breadth that you can get within this particular degree. Next slide, please. Our latest addition to our suite of offerings, picking up the Rolling Stones principle of being adaptive, is our Bachelor of Data Science, which was introduced for the first time in 2021. Now, this is very much about managing or perhaps reacting to the rise of data. There's a number of areas where data is becoming increasingly important, and we're finding that our previous offers probably weren't quite matching what the market wanted in terms of having people who could specialise in the analysis, communication, understanding of data. So in order to do that, we sat down with our colleagues in maths and designed a data science degree that isn't just an add-on to a computing degree, but took the best bits of computing you need to be able to gather, analyse and manipulate data, together with the mathematical analysis needed, statistical and otherwise, to be able to analyse, interpret and make conclusions from that data. So it's still new. As I said, we had our first intake in 2021, but it's very much about focusing on perhaps a more specialised version of computing together with some specialised skills from maths to be able to say this person can understand, interpret and use data. As we said earlier, if data is the new oil, this is the way to become people to exploit that resource. So it's very much a new offering in order to meet new demand. Next slide, please. Now, the sort of careers you might end up here are things like analytics specialists, business intelligence analysts. We're seeing roles called data scientists or data interpreter and things like that as well, data architect. So it's very much about focusing on the data rather than about focusing on the technologies. And that's something that's an increasing trend, and we anticipate we'll see more and more demand in this kind of area than we have in future. Now, a question from the chat is, can a Bachelor of Computer Science Information Technology accommodate a major or minor in cybersecurity and games design? Yes, we certainly can accommodate cybersecurity, and the computer science one can accommodate games design. So that's certainly the case. So in other words, there is a possibility if you want to be a cybersecurity specialist to do so within computing or information technology, and for games design, yes, within computer science. So the short answer to that question is yes. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things I mentioned about RMIT is pathways. Now, if for some reason you don't have the entry requirements for any of those 4 degrees, don't despair, there's always a pathway. One of the things about RMIT is we're such a big place, we teach all kinds of things. We also include teaching an associate degree in information technology and other offerings at the vocational education environment. And if you do complete the associate degree in information technology, the advantage of that is you get a pathway into the Bachelor of Information Technology with a full 2 years credit. So in other words, if you entered the associate degree, complete it, which takes 2 years, you complete that degree, then you guarantee an entry into you have a guaranteed pathway into the Bachelor of Information Technology. 1 more year sees you complete a Bachelor of Information Technology. So you don't lose any time that way. Now, it's possible to pathway into other programs than the Bachelor of Information Technology, but you certainly, you might get less credit. But that's one way that you don't lose any time in that sense. So if you don't have the entry requirements for any particular course, never despair. There's always a way. It's just a matter of finding it. And so one way can well be the associate degree in information technology. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at entry options into computing at RMIT. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned that RMIT is very much an applied institute. We started out as a working man's college and have very much kept that ethos. So a lot of what we do, whichever of the particular programs you might be involved in, involves working on industry projects with real clients. So every program has what we call capstone requirements, where every student must complete an industry project either with real clients or for real clients. Now, it can take part in a number of different contexts. We've had people go overseas to do these kind of placements, or locally or otherwise, or it might be involving hackathons or competitions or other kinds of things. So there's a big emphasis at RMIT. It's not just about learning in the classroom, but bringing not just the real world into the classroom, but taking the classroom out to the real world. And the more contact we can have with industry professionals, be it by mentoring or by projects or by guest lectures or whatever it might be, we want to do more and more of that. And you can see some of the statistics here across RMIT. We had 15,000 students undertaking a couple of thousand different global industry partners even last year. So there's a lot of that sort of emphasis on what you'll be learning. Next slide, please. The sorts of things you might do, well, it depends exactly on the particular course requirements. We mentioned software engineering. You have a one-year internship that you do in that. But even if you're not doing software engineering, we have what we call work integrated learning, where you must do at least 2 courses worth of those are, well, real projects that involve industries coming to us and saying, we want some people to work on these particular areas. And in the past, we've had someone like an entrepreneur say, I want some students to write this mobile app that I think will make me some money. So it becomes a prototype for something they might further develop, or other kinds of work that needs to be done. So very much it's about having the real projects and real experience while you're studying, not only after you graduate. So that's an important feature of whichever program you choose. You cannot avoid this sort of work integrated learning projects and options for industry placement. Next slide, please. We mentioned the global opportunities. Well, RMIT has a number of partnerships with places all over the world, as you can see by this particular list. And part of that size that RMIT has means that a lot of people can say things like, well, what if I want to study elsewhere? What if I want to get some different context than what I can get here in Australia? Well, as you can see from this list, there's a number of different places where we can have global study opportunities, either by moving to there for 6 months or 2 weeks or some other kind of environment like that. And certainly RMIT sees itself as part of this global network, and how that can be brought into your degree depends on your particular program and your particular interests. The main thing I want to say is there's lots of potential for having that sort of global perspective rather than only the one you get from inside your classroom in that particular issue. There's a question in the chat about ethical hacking. I'm interested in pursuing cybersecurity. Is this covered much in security and cloud computing in the Bachelor of Computer Science? Yes, in the cybersecurity subjects, we do talk about ethical hacking, or if you like, having how do we understand the levels of security of systems. I guess the short answer is we do some. I suppose how much is an interesting issue, but I guess typically we do that within a cybersecurity major. You would do a lot more on ethical hacking, and also a lot more of the technical defences you might have, but how do you prevent hacking in the first place? Whereas ethical hacking is more about how secure is your particular system. But again, the short answer would be yes. Next slide, please. Finally, let me finish up here with a couple of our scholarship opportunities. We're very pleased to announce we've recently got this RMIT Tech Ignite scholarships, which are scholarship internship programming for diverse or disadvantaged students to the value of $15,000 a year for the duration of the program, either 3 or 4 years. Now, there's some eligibility criteria there. You have to be an Australian citizen commencing full-time study from 2022 and be from a diverse background or able to demonstrate this advantage. And you can see there'll be further details available on the webpage. You'll have to apply fairly soon, so you have to apply by October, so do keep that in mind. And this is very much thanks to our good friends at Pepperstone and Build Exact that we've been able to offer this particular program. So we're very proud to be able to do that as a way of fulfilling RMIT's mission of having particular support for those who may not traditionally come from backgrounds that are, shall we say, typically people go to university. Next slide, please. We have a second opportunity as well, which is the Westpac Young Technologist Scholarship, which is value of $5,000 a year for 3 years. Again, you have to be an Australian citizen and have completed Year 12 in the past 2 years and be commencing full-time in the programs. But you have a bit longer to apply for that until January in that sense. So those are great incentives, and if you like, we find those are very great endorsement of our product by some companies who are prepared to put some money into saying, we like what you're doing, so can we support some people in your programs? So hopefully there are advantages of what you have, what you might want to have. Next slide, please. That's everything I had to say, so thank you for your attention. If you've got particular questions, please put them in the chat and we will address them as soon as we can. But just want to say, to finish up with, to pick up the Rolling Stones theme again, of course, at RMIT, unlike the Rolling Stones, you're bound to get satisfaction. So thank you for your attention, everybody. If you've got questions, I will answer them, and I know there's a few coming through already, so happy to answer any particular questions you may have, but we won't be presenting slides any further than that. One question that's come up in the chat is MacBooks versus Windows laptop. What will be suitable for the courses? Either, really. I guess we tend to be technology agnostic as much as we can, and certainly a lot of students will bring their own laptop, whether it's a MacBook or a Windows, or for that matter, a Linux laptop as well. I guess a lot of the environments we set are not particularly requiring either. So it depends a bit on the exact subject you're doing, what the technological kind of suite you need is. But certainly there's no particular, you must have a MacBook or you must not have a Windows or anything like that. There's no particular requirements either way to have one piece of hardware or the other. And I think that very much reflects our status as technologists rather than particular, what's the word here? People locked into particular technologies. We try to be as technology agnostic as possible. All right, let me just see what questions we have here that people have asked. We'll see what we get up to. What will we learn in cybersecurity? Excellent question. Well, I guess there's a number of different aspects to it. Some of it is things like encryption. So how do you keep things secret? Others are more about things like protocols. So how do we go about keeping things secure? So for example, there were some security breaches a few years ago, which when we discovered how they were breached, meant that passwords, for example, were kept in unencrypted form. So it meant if someone got access to the system, they could read everything. Whereas there's a lot of standard techniques to say keep passwords in encrypted form. So even if someone gains access to your system, they still don't get access to your passwords. So that's, if you like, a protocol or a process to put in place to make sure that things keep secure. We also do a lot of case studies about what industry trends are, what people are doing, the use of things like firewalls, viruses. What is a virus? How do you prevent them? What's a firewall? What is its role? Things like that. So it's very much about the technological issues or the kinds of environment in which you'll be working. Someone mentioned ethical hacking earlier. That's part of, if you like, the defense against hacking is knowing not just the technologies, but also the right processes to put in place. That's the kind of basis that we have our cybersecurity kind of issues. I probably could go on more and more, but hopefully that gives you at least some idea of what the what you'll be learning in that particular aspect. Okay, it's a question about maths. I'm not the greatest at methods. How maths related is a course like computer science and software engineering? I guess that's an excellent question. I guess the way to put it, we don't expect you to be an expert mathematician. At the end of the day, it's about computer science. It's not about mathematics. But there are some strong correlations with those who have ability at maths and those and the abstract nature of some of the work we do in computing. But I think if you looked at the subjects themselves, you're not going to be solving differential equations or doing complicated integrals or things like that in computing. I think the main thing is what you might call mathematical literacy rather than mathematical wizardry. So no one's going to expect you to be a maths wizard, but a lot of the way we talk about problems, the way we analyze problems, the way we solve problems is mathematical in nature. So cybersecurity is a good example. If someone says, how do I encrypt something? Well, it's a matter of understanding how do you take something that is readable to everybody and make it disguised. And that involves a lot of mathematical concepts such as functions, about intractability, about what's possible. And that involves a mathematical understanding or nature of the problem. So it's not so much about, are you a mathematics wizard? It's more, is it simply a matter of having an ability with the language to understand the concepts that are presented that way? So it's not a requirement that you have to do a lot of maths. Some areas are more mathematical than others. Certainly if you're into things like augmented reality or games, you have to have a better understanding of the pragmatics of 3D rotations and things like that. But that doesn't mean you have to have really great scores in vector analysis or matrix multiplication or things like that. So it's there is, if you like, mathematical material, but not mathematical wizardry that's required. There's a question, what language is used the most in software engineering? Excellent question. A number of them. I guess we teach Java, Python, C++, and depending on your elective choices, other possibilities. I think part of the education we would impart to our students is that you should not be a language specialist in the sense that say, well, I can program in Java, but I've no idea about Python, or vice versa. I know Python, but I've no idea about Java. Our philosophy is very much you should be able to know a handful of the most common languages and therefore be able to use any language that is appropriate. In other words, it's a bit like saying, I know what I can do, I know what a hammer is, but a drill, I've no idea. You should be able to use anything in the toolbox, as it were, in that kind of sense. So there's no specific language, but I guess Java, Python, and C++ would be the three most common that you would come across. There's a question about course credits having completed the BCE algorithmics subject. Look, in a nutshell, yes, we do give course credits for that. For memory, we get 2 course credits for someone who's completed that particular subject. So there'll be 2 less subjects you'd have to complete to do your program. I'm not sure we've advertised that as fully as perhaps we could, and we're certainly talking about that, how we might get that up and running. But my understanding is you get 2 subjects worth of credit for completing BCE algorithmics. Just having a look, any further questions? I'm not sure I'm seeing further questions right here and now. Are there any last questions that people want to ask? Do we have some further questions out there? Going once, going twice. I'm not seeing anything else just so far. I think time to wrap up. Okay. Oh, there is one question about pathways for software engineering. I guess part of the issue for that is if you don't have the maths requirement for, say, software engineering, probably the best pathway is the Bachelor of Information Technology. And certainly each year we have a number of people who start in that particular course and do well within it. So if you look at the first year of Bachelor of Information Technology and you did particularly well, then it's possible to transfer into computer science or software engineering at the end of first year. For that matter, you can also do it at the end of second year, but it's most commonly done at the end of first year. But the key thing is get into some particular course, say the Bachelor of Information Technology, and do well in it to show that you're not just scraping by, but you do well in your particular subjects. Then you can apply to enter software engineering after the first year. Okay, so that's probably the best pathway. Well, thank you for your attention, everyone. Thank you for your questions. I believe that that's pretty much answered everything, so we might wrap things up there. But thank you for your attention. If you have further questions, please do contact us via the RMIT Open Day website and so forth. And thank you for your attention. Hope you have a wonderful time. And do remember that slogan, unlike the Rolling Stones, at RMIT you get satisfaction. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.